Will the new UK tariff allow as many tax-free imports as the EU single market tariff? Sources we will look at later suggest that overall, in the short term, a higher percentage of imports, by value, will be tariff-free. Bear in mind that the UK temporary tariff is due to be reset with new rates in the months following Brexit. How is it possible that more imports by value could be tariff-free after a no-deal Brexit? Roughly speaking, more products from non-EU countries would qualify for lower import duties, or 0.00% import duty, due to new trade agreements starting day one after Brexit. Whilst a higher percentage of products from the EU would start qualifying for a higher rate of import duty, the balance all in all may result in more tax-free imports, in the short term, at least. On top of this, for any country, imports raise revenue for government coffers. However, if the prevailing British government wanted to prove that Brexit was good for business, they may use imports as a tool to protect UK businesses. In this case, import duties could rise for those overseas goods that were in direct competition with UK products. On the other hand, imports of materials and parts, required by UK businesses to manufacture UK products, would have a more favourable rate of duty placed upon them. This process is complicated by the fact that any favourable rates for import duty would first need to be sanctioned in a completed trade agreement, so as not to conflict with World Trade Organization terms and rules. We saw that the EU has around 40 free trade deals. Keeping UK businesses competitive on a global level may require just as many trade agreements. What is the government doing to reduce the consequences of losing EU trade agreements? Although EU member states cannot embark on trade agreements for themselves, the UK government, currently still as an EU member, can pedal hard and fast in an attempt to have as many negotiations finalised and sewn up, with contracts ready to start, just after a no-deal Brexit. Negotiations are required in order to set up trade deals between countries, and many factors can come into play in these negotiations. One of which is the issue of which set of goods-related standards and procedures to follow. This issue can complicate and lengthen trade negotiations. Although meetings have been taking place, one of the main sticking points concerns the standards to which goods have to conform. Most of the existing EU trade agreements specify EU standards. How does this affect the UK? If the UK simply wanted to tweak existing EU trade agreements, such that the tweaked contracts then applied just to the UK and the third country concerned, and where both parties continued using the EU standards that were already in place, then the negotiations could proceed relatively seamlessly and quickly. However, if the UK wanted to replace EU standards with new UK standards, or if the third country wanted to replace EU standards with its own standards, then negotiations would have to be started from scratch, drastically lengthening the process. Are there any other concerns related to the UK signing new trade agreements? Yes. Many highly regulated industries, such as the aircraft industries and chemical industries, have safety and business continuity concerns above and beyond concerns about increased costs for imports and exports. What concerns are these? For example, the EU has spent somewhere in the region of €500 million on producing standards for the chemical industries, and perhaps more on aircraft standards. These have become widely accepted, in many areas around the world, as the leading standards of safety for the industry. Diverging from these standards would disqualify their products and designs from markets that adhered to EU standards. Some practitioners argue that, rather than spending many hundreds of millions on simply copying EU standards in order to create new UK standards, that the UK should simply agree on using existing EU standards in any new trade agreements, especially for highly regulated industries. This would save a lot of money needlessly creating new standards. This would avoid the risk of diverging from globally accepted EU standards, and damaging business continuity. It would also allow new trade agreements to be completed and signed much more quickly. How many trade deals would it take to mitigate the effect of a no-deal Brexit? That is a difficult question to answer. The EU has always taken the most significant portion of UK exports. Some figures suggest that prior to Brexit, the UK exported just over twice as much to the EU as it did to the States. What about other trade agreements? How far has the UK got in negotiations? Prior to Brexit, and according to BBC sources, the UK has signed 15 continuity deals covering 40 countries or territories. If the EU trade deals cover over 70 countries, then this sounds like roughly half of those countries have signed to continue existing arrangements with the UK. Also, from guidance, UK trade agreements with non-EU countries in a no-deal Brexit, we see agreements to take effect as soon as the UK leaves the EU. Trade agreements still in discussion. If there are any agreements still yet to be completed when the UK leaves the EU, trade will have to continue with those countries on World Trade Organization, WTO, terms. We see a list of countries where trade agreements that have been signed. We've touched on some of these countries earlier. The CARIFORUM Group, Central America, Iceland and Norway, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and more. We see a list of trade agreements still in discussion. Also, mutual recognition agreements. A mutual recognition agreement is one in which countries recognize one another's conformity assessments. When conformity assessments are applied to products, they are tested to an established performance standard. Inspections, quality management, surveillance, accreditation and declarations of conformity also take place. We do look at issues and examples of conformity in a no-deal Brexit scenario in future videos.